Real quick, my Firestarters, I've got to talk to you about time travel and horror. As evidenced by my Causal Loops video, I've got something of a soft spot for the time travel subgenre. What interests me even more is when horror and time travel mix into some unholy union I like to call the recursive hell genre. The thing about this is that it's not even on TV tropes. Instead, it could fit comfortably within the Groundhog Day loop class, but for me there are some distinctive differences. For one, the subgenre really seems to be something that is better felt than shown off. There are certain tropes that, in the moment they present themselves in the movie, I can tell that it's going to be a recursive hell film. Before we get into it, I wanted to thank my patrons Chris Marketson, Jeff Strait, and Stormy OK. If you want to support us, make sure you check us out at patreon.com/JustinDHeard. For $1 per video, you can get your name announced at the beginning just like they are. Further tiers include getting my scripts as I write them, and also getting to choose your own topic for me to cover. Make sure to like this episode or I'm gonna set you on fire. Now, doesn't that sound amazing? Also, I'd like to say spoilers for the following films. 1408, Baskin, Brain Dead, Happy Death Day, In the Mouth of Madness, Jacob's Ladder, Mind Games, The Devil's Advocate, The Prestige, Time Lapse, Triangle, Yellow Brick Road. Whew, that's a lot to talk about. Now that we've got that out of the way, I'd like to talk about my favorite horror subgenre, the recursive hell film. Oh yeah, and this is dubious consumption. If I were going to distill this concept into one sentence, it would be a type of storytelling that uses repetition to undermine our original understanding of the story. From what I've found, these fall into two main forms, through subversion, such as Baskin, Brain Dead, and Jacob's Ladder, and repetition, such as Happy Death Day, Mind Games, and Triangle. There are those that travel between these, and those that somehow fall short of both of these descriptions. I guess this is just my way of saying there are dozens that can fall into these definitions and others. And I'm only going to cover a few specific examples in this video, but if you're interested in more, hit that like button, leave a comment with all your suggestions and all that jazz, and let me know if I should continue down this rabbit hole. And, maybe answer a poll or two. So let's jump straight into our first category, subversion. Now here's an interesting thing. One of the first popular occurrences of this type of subversion with recursive hell came in 1890 from our old friend Ambrose Bierce. In an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, the main character is set to be hung from the neck until dead. As you do during the Civil War. However, when he falls, the rope breaks and he escapes down the river. He hallucinates, and as he travels through an endless forest, he ends up home. But before he can embrace his wife, the noose breaks his neck. I'm sure you can see the parallels with one of our most famous recursive hell films, Jacob's Ladder. More on that later. But for now, subversion really comes into play when you think the story is one thing, only to have the rug pulled out from under you in the last act. Sometimes there's an entire act that follows the reveal. Others, however, can hit in the last moments of the story, leading to a mostly unsatisfying ending. Baskin is a great example of this. An unholy mixture of The Descent and Hellraiser, this Turkish film plays out like a dark fantasy, straddling the lines of horror and drama, until in the transition into the second act, the characters are on a long stretch of road and they're suddenly lost, unable to get a hold of dispatch. They hit a random person on the road, don't identify them, and suddenly I know that I'm in a recursive hell film. The weirdness only intensifies from there, but it's not until the final moments of the film does this realization pay off, when the lead escapes the cult's church, dashing into the road. He's run over by the team as they can't get a hold of dispatch. For me, the biggest factor about recursive hell is that it's not about escaping your torment, but being thrown full force into it and not being able to set things right no matter what you do. Thus, you are fated to relive the same disjointed loop no matter what role you play. It will always end up the same. This happens to be one of those films that plays more into the subversion of it, where the end revelation doesn't quite expand the meaning. Instead, it confuses the story in their attempt for a quick shock. Brain Dead is, well, it falls into an odd spot. To be honest, it's one of those films I'm not even sure I understand. It regularly gets confused with Peter Jackson's 1992 Dead Alive, also known as Brain Dead. Whereas Peter Jackson's film is a horror comedy that deals with the undead in increasingly gruesome ways, The 1990 Brain Dead deals with the matters of neuroscience and tries to get you to question what's real and what isn't in the film itself. Bill Pullman plays the neurotic but good-natured doctor tasked with extracting information from a mentally incompetent mathematician. In the process, he's run over and enters a dreamscape where he's not sure if he's the patient or the doctor. There are hints before this.
Pay attention to the strangeness of the weather, the shift in gravity.
But those are thrown away as reality flies out the window. There's an amazing scene where Pullman is brought back to his office, gives incredibly articulate details about his life, including graduating from the Miskatonic University, only to be shown that his 8th floor office in the Beaumont building faces out onto the 2nd-story lawn. However, the ending subverts this by revealing that these experiences were all hallucinations that he was spinning in his brain-damaged state. The final shot pulls out from a shelf full of brains, with Bill Pullman's clearly marked in a jar, as he says,
"I'm dead, I think. Oh, this should be interesting."
This is definitely one of those that you understand but can't quite piece together when you're looking back on it. I wouldn't expect less from an idea constructed by Charles Beaumont from the original Twilight Zone oeuvre. My only real complaint with the film is that it can be quite stale. It feels as if they're trying to replicate David Cronenberg's aesthetic, but are missing that key ingredient. The thing that definitely holds this film up are its ideas, not so much its execution. Once again, we run into more interesting than good. For our last example of the subversion genre, we've come to our most well-known entry, Jacob's Ladder. I think at this point everyone knows the main twist just through cultural osmosis. But for those that haven't seen this almost 30-year-old film, the entire film is the death hallucination of Jacob as he bleeds out during the Vietnam War. I know, shocking, right? It's almost as if he was in hell the whole time. Eckhart saw hell too. He said, "The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life, your memories, attachments. They burn them all away. But they're not punishing you," he said. "They're freeing your soul." So the way he sees it, if you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look about it. That's all. Louis DiNardo, Jacob's Ladder. Like the dirty undergrowth of a David Lynch movie, Jacob's Ladder has been pivotal in shaping horror through multiple timelines, lives, and the stark imagery that has inspired classics like Silent Hill. Each life is a refraction of a previous one, something that doesn't quite fit with the previous iteration, but still feels true regardless, as plainly laid out by Louis. His angels are demons, just because he can't let go. Another inspiration for horror fare like my last video. While the truth is fully hinted at, Jacob's Ladder has become a template for this type of film, including one of my favorite films in the genre, The Jacket. Maybe I'll cover that next time. What do you guys think? I can't think of any better example to transition into the other main category, repetition. This is the category I was thinking about when I flippantly called this Time Loops in Horror on the community poll. Now, some might quibble with me including this title, but come on people, Happy Death Day is a slasher at its heart. The big twist on this one for those that haven't seen it is that no matter what happens, Tree is killed and starts the day over. While they definitely play into the comedy, it's an excuse to create something interesting and dynamic and strike most of the staples of horror with each death. What makes Happy Death Day noteworthy is they introduce that each death is affecting Tree's body. So as the film continues, she gets weaker and isn't sure how much longer she can hold out. The other inversion is that they have a traditional Groundhog Day, everything goes right ending, playing into film tropes with that loop ending in a 16 Candles homage, only for Tree to die again, resetting all of her well-earned catharsis. Instead, she loses those repaired relationships, but finally manages to suss out the real killer. I don't understand all the hate for the first film. While it's not a hardcore horror or even scary, neither were the late 90s teen slashers that were so prevalent at that time. Mind Games is a little known gem that I seem to be the only one talking about. I discovered this while exploring this subgenre. I honestly can't even remember if I realized it was a time loop in horror movie before I watched it, but I was pleasantly surprised nonetheless. A group of teens are on their way to a cabin for their vacation, only to accidentally hit someone on their way in. Sound familiar? There, they find a note stating that their friends will be right back, but why is the power cut off? I'm sure you can see some of the threads they're putting into place to be paid off later. This movie does a lot to set up and pay off those threads, and try to give the characters the right motivation to keep them going. In exploring the surrounding area, somebody finds the bodies of the characters from previous iterations. They even find a caged-up copy of the girlfriend still living, only to abandon her in her prison cell. The issue with this film is that they use the main character's mental illness as a plot point, mentioning it frequently and making him a prime candidate for him being the murderer.
This has got nothing to do with that!
It doesn't help that through the multiple loops we discover that he is the villain. The one big difference at the end of Mind Games is, while we see the start of the loop again, it seems that the new loop is going to be interrupted by one of the surviving friends. In the end, there's not a great reasoning for the main character to go all slasher on his friends, other than they're cautious about his mental issues and immediately assume he's the threat. And because they treated him as the killer, he becomes the killer they were afraid he'd become. However, in Triangle, every loop of the journey is played through, showing you exactly how each event created another. Even if it's not in strict linear order, we stay with Jess the entire film, seeing how she comes to each decision, descending into madness and violence. By the end, we're still stuck in this constant hell, knowing it's going to happen again. What's even better is that they show several times that this has happened way more than the loop shown. Triangle does a great job establishing intentionality as opposed to its similar foreign language brother, Time Crimes, where the decisions ultimately feel arbitrary, more of a means to the end by the writer than anything a normal person would do. And that's a big issue for the subgenre. The writer steps in to make the characters do what they want. The reason they turned left instead of right? Well, the writer needed them there, so they went. Honestly, we see this all the time in horror. The characters don't know they're in a horror movie and thus make the dumbest choices. The worst example of this is from Terrifier, where the lead has Art the Clown down using a 2x4 to take him out, only for her to taunt him and get shot in the process. Sorry, went down a little rabbit hole there. Where were we? Oh yeah, let's get some fire started. As always, you can support Dubious consumption through Patreon. For just $1 a video, you can get your name in the credits. It's a great way to influence future content as you get early access for the videos, also exclusive polls, and can even pick the next video I do. If you can't support us by throwing money our way, you can still hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to help spread the fires. Hit the bell to get notifications as soon as I post a new video. You can always find me at justindheard.net and at justindheard on Twitter. We now have t-shirts and other merch that you can grab, everything from shirts to journals and pillows, or even this shirt. It's all there for you. Ah! And now the outliers I couldn't quite place. These are an interesting amalgamation of these ideas, twisting or entirely discarding them to tell their version of the story. Some of these are my favorites. Others are weird additions to my list that I didn't quite know how to feel about them. However, I think what really attracts me to recursive hell movies is, well, it's a personal affair. For anyone that follows me on social media, you might know about my chronic migraines. Almost every day I'm being assaulted by my own brain, feeling as if knives or nails are being driven through my skull. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's horrible, but I am surviving it. However, a part of the more intense migraines are whenever I have an ocular migraine. This little tear in the fabric of my vision that spreads and spreads until I can't see what's in front of me. Thankfully, that does tend to pull back, but it's mere minutes before the pain hits. And let me tell you, those things will stop your day in its tracks. For me, a typical migraine means that light and sound are almost unbearable. My personality is shot without pain relief, and even sometimes with it. Phrases and odd rhythms play on repeat and are all too physical. Someone bouncing a basketball on the floor resets my brain, a very real hiccup in my thoughts. Sleep and darkness just make these oddities worse. I can even tell I'm having a migraine when I'm dreaming, or more accurately, when I will wake up with one. Typically, this hits with a repetitious stream. When I was younger and into watching wrestling, it was akin to being thrown off of a turnbuckle over and over again. Now that I'm older, it's simply going through the same scenario over and over again with minimal changes, but knowing you're doing it all the same, unable to break the cycle. Sound familiar? With migraines, your options are limited. The pain is debilitating, so are most of the cures. The only thing allowing me to function as a human are painkillers and anti-nausea. Without those, I'd be stuck in bed every single day. Recursive hell films put you in the same status, limiting the options, showing one path at a time and still losing in most instances. The thing about this genre is that it's easy to trip into mediocrity with a lazy, "you were in hell the whole time" ending. For a long time, this was the hallmark of an amateur writer for me, someone who created a lot of weird scenarios but has no idea how to end the story. I've even fallen to that whenever I was a teenager. One of my favorite horror films suffers from this: Yellow Brick Road. Yellow Brick Road was the first film I covered on this channel. It could roughly be argued that it fits this recursive hell subgenre, but it's not hinted at that this is an endless loop, just the full journey. There are hints, such as him starting out with the usher and ending at the theater with the same character, but ultimately, there's nothing to suggest they've done this before or will do it again. It does use many of the same tropes, but forgot that last crucial shot of the character starting their journey again, unsure of what they had done before. And yes, it ends with a slight variation on "You were in hell the whole time," with a movie of his journey playing in the same theater.
Daddy, all of the people have disappeared. This is our home. Doesn't have to be so much pain.
This was used correctly in one of John Carpenter's seminal works, In the Mouth of Madness. As opposed to other time loops in horror, In the Mouth of Madness plays more with the fourth wall, dragging Sam Neill's John Trent into the story, into a film within a film where he's the main character in the book and its subsequent adaptation. He's stuck in a loop where he has no agency, because he's written that way, no matter how hard he tries to escape the fact that he's now a character in the metafiction. The film ends with him watching a movie of what he's experienced, cackling madly as it plays out. I'm not quite sure how to place these films into my loosely fitting recursive hell subgenre. They flirt with the ideas, but take a hard left turn with their execution of it. 1408 is a surprisingly brutal film for a film that seems like it's a simple haunted house room.
This is it?
It eventually twists itself into a recursive hell picture without ever using that twist I mentioned in Baskin. The main character doesn't die while being tormented. Instead, 1408 defies convention by allowing the main character to believe he left, that he beat the room, only for it all to be torn down and reset to the beginning of the night. What really clinches the deal and lets us know its recursive plans is the phone call that states,
"You can choose to relive this hour over and over, or you can take advantage of our express checkout system."
It's interesting how this film presents itself more as a psychological horror, attacking John Cusack's psyche throughout the film. The hotel room is alive and knows all the best ways to break your sanity. However, it also inverts the trap of recursive hell plots. Death is an escape. I mean, as far as we are led to believe. In the theatrical ending, John Cusack escapes and all is good. However, in the alternate ending, he is haunting Samuel L. Jackson trapped in the hotel room.
1408.
The Devil's Advocate plays a similar trick, only revealing in a key moment at the end that it's truly a recursive event. There are none of the usual hallmarks, such as repeating events or subverting the narrative in the last act. However, there are oddities, scares, and horrors definitely happening to Keanu throughout. One of the cool things about this film is that it plays with trippy imagery and what seems to be the darkest, most terrible timeline.
One thing has become clear. This is the darkest, most terrible timeline.
Enough with the timeline crap, Abed!
This is another movie that I'm pretty sure cultural osmosis has spoiled this for you long ago. Here it is for those that don't know. Al Pacino is the devil. Shocking, I know. But the added twist is that Keanu is his son, meant to father the Antichrist. In an attempt to thwart the Antichrist, Keanu kills himself, only to repeat the opening of the movie once more. This time, he does things right by refusing to represent his guilty client, but then trips into the sin of vanity, only for the reporter responsible to reveal himself to be Al Pacino the whole time! But seriously, check out this film if you like dark thrillers. This definitely goes places and it's worth the ride, even if it doesn't quite fit in my qualifiers.
The Devil's Advocate.
So this last one is one of those films that I'm not even sure how I feel about it. I'm not certain if it's really a time loop movie in the first place. Add to that, it's not a horror film, but, well, this is my list and I need to talk about this damn thing. Time Lapse has a ton of things to like about it. Honestly, it calls to mind House of Leaves' setup. An old man dies and someone finds a strange object in his apartment that changes their lives. If I were to make a fake trailer for a House of Leaves series, I would definitely include this film in the mix. However, instead of a disjointed book, the main characters find a gigantic camera that takes pictures of their apartment at 8 p.m. every day and generates a snapshot of what's going to happen 24 hours in the future. They start using the photos to inspire the painter with its framed shots of his next piece. Instead of allowing him to break his block, he uses it as a crutch, copying his future self rather than coming up with anything new. Afraid that any deviation would cause them to die a horrific death, they use the photos to gamble on horses. Obviously, things go bad when the gambler suddenly has a hot streak and brings a local long shark into the mix. As I've stated, this is where things get unclear for me. With everything that happens, there's more copying the photos rather than deviation from anything they've shown. All the drama and choices really play out as a consequence of those snapshots rather than anything they're really doing to deviate. In the last act, it's revealed that another set of photos were coming out in the morning and were being used to manipulate events that we weren't seeing. And this is where the film really muddies the issue. In a turn of events, the painter's girlfriend kills both of her friends in an effort to keep her secret. As she posts a warning to herself in the window, the local security guard comes by and discovers the dead bodies. As she is being led away, the message falls away, further cementing that if this was a causal loop movie, then she didn't stop herself from killing them, and well, we'll never know. I contend that this isn't a time loop movie because all they do is react to the images they're seeing, with the exception of the girlfriend. But even then, we don't really get much more than her following the direction she's given from a future self, rather than doing anything really plotting on her own. And that's it. What do you think? Does time-lapse belong in this recursive hell list, or even a causal time loop movie? What about my list? Are there any films I missed that you want me to talk about? Should I do another one of these lists with even more classifications and movies to talk about? I've definitely been building a list of movies that play with these concepts and would love to delve into them further. As always, my name is Justin D. Hurd. This has been Dubious Consumption, and I'm outro. Oh! I regularly... You can choose to repeat this hour over and over again, or you can take advantage of our express checkout system. It's interesting. Wow, I can't even finish that word. Oh yeah, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this is Dubious Consumption.